It's Remembrance Day and Veterans Week. The city of Toronto is honoring the only all-black military unit in Canada's military history. We've been talking about it for the past few days. The number 2 Construction Battalion that served in the First World War. Soldiers went overseas in 1916. They worked in logging operations. They built roads. They maintained the infrastructure of Canadian bases in Europe. And a permanent plaque now honors their accomplishments in Toronto's downtown core. To tell us more about this story, someone you are certainly going to recognize from his incredible work on television and in film, Anthony Sherwood is with me this morning, who has a personal connection to all of this, a great uncle who became the chaplain of the battalion. We're going to talk about all of that, but let me just say good morning. First of all, to Anthony from Brampton, Ontario. It's just a delight to have you as a special guest on the program today. Welcome.
Thank you, Heather. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, there's an interesting story to tell that not enough Canadians know. So why don't we start at the beginning? For black men in Canada, Anthony, in 1914, what was the reality for any black men who wanted to serve king and country in the First World War?
Well, when the First World War broke out, African Canadian men tried to enlist, and they were refused simply based on the color of their skin. And so my great uncle, William Andrew White, who was a Baptist minister, he spearheaded a movement to force the Canadian government to allow African Canadian men to join the army. So in 1916, the government finally accepted blacks into the army. And I'm so proud that my great uncle, Reverend William Andrew White, who was the chaplain for the battalion, played an important role in this. And while he was serving in France with these black soldiers, and they were, a lot of them were young. A lot of them enlisted and lied about their ages. Some were as young as 17 and 16, and they looked upon him as a father figure. And when he saw what was happening to these black soldiers, the way they were treated by their white officers, he kept a diary, and he wrote everything that he saw. And he had this wonderful ability to transport you back in time by painting these vivid images with these poetic words and eloquent descriptions.
Pause for just a second, because you made excellent use of the diary, and I want to talk about what you did with that. But back to the men at the time in the 2nd Battalion. So you raised a couple of questions. They faced racism in trying to even enlist, and then they certainly faced racism, as you just said, while they were serving. Why did they even want to? If king and country didn't want the black men of Canada, why did they want to serve?
Because, Heather, you have to realize that I'm a 7th generation African Canadian, and a lot of these men had been in Canada for generations and generations before the First World War. So they had a loyalty to their country. They wanted to defend their country. And also, the word was out that black men would not make good soldiers. They would run in the face of danger. And so they had something to prove.
And yet, when they were able to form this construction battalion, they were given shovels, not rifles. Was the thinking that they wouldn't be apt soldiers?
There were two things, actually. They couldn't just enlist black men into the army and let them serve in regular regiments, because the white soldiers would refuse to serve with them. You have to remember that they would have to sleep in the same barracks. And back then, especially in Nova Scotia, especially in Halifax, Halifax was a segregated city during the First World War. And so they decided to form a segregated labor battalion that was assigned to the Forestry Corps. And as you mentioned, Heather, their job was to cut lumber and build huts and dig trenches. And that was one of the reasons why.
Invaluable in terms of the Canadian infrastructure and what they needed in that First World War. What was the response that they received when they came home, Anthony?
Well, when they came home, a lot of these men, when I was doing my film, and doing the research and speaking to the families, a lot of these men did not want to talk about the war, and that occurred mostly with all Canadian men who served abroad. They didn't like to talk about the war, but they were not treated as heroes. They Their role in the First World War was almost forgotten and not publicized. And it wasn't until Senator Calvin Ruck wrote his book of the Black Battalion, Canada's Best Kept Military Secret, that we started to learn about this important piece of Canadian history.
And then you're bringing it to us. You've alluded to a couple of things: the diary that your great uncle wrote, and then the film, the docudrama that you made based on that, an award-winning docudrama from 2016, Honor Before Glory, in which you actually played your great uncle. So what was that experience like for you to channel all of that history and all of that personal history in the role and in the acting performance?
Well, the film was actually produced in 2001. It had its television premiere on CBC Television back then. It was an honor for me to play my great uncle because he was a great Canadian hero to me. And it was important for me to tell his story. The film has done so well. It's been all around the world in different film festivals. But it was such an honor for me to do the film and tell his story. When I read his diary, I could see and feel the pain and the agony and the hurt in his words in the diary. And it was the only diary he ever kept in his life. And I asked myself, why would he take the time to write this diary? And it was because the soldiers were treated so badly. They were worked in all kinds of inclement weather, rain and snow. And when they got sick, the white doctors refused to take care of them. And some of them died because of it. And that was one of the reasons why the federal government finally decided to issue a formal apology to them.
There is a stamp. There is now in Toronto a plaque. But as you say, Canada's great military secret. I mean, we've learned so much in our conversation with you this morning already, Anthony, but maybe a parting thought on what we need to keep in mind for this Remembrance Day of those who served and sacrificed in their own way in Number 2 Construction Battalion. What's a final thought from you on that today?
This country was built with hands of many different colors, and people of many different faiths, religions, ethnic backgrounds, races served in the First World War and in the Second World War. The Indigenous people, African Canadian people. And it's important to know that we all made important contributions to the fight and should all be remembered.
You've helped us do just that. Thank you so much for the time and sharing the story of your great uncle. It's been a pleasure to hear about it and to have you on the show. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, Heather.